Hi friends, this is gonna be the final episode of Political Prude, the podcast, before we head to the polls. Now, it has been an incredible journey. We didn't expect how far and wide this podcast was going to reach, and it's been just mind-blowing. I've been really grateful for all your support, and I'm also very grateful to the team that has been working tirelessly behind this show. So please allow me to just give a shout out to the following people: Afika, Iyang, Margot, Zulria, Ashi, Aurelie, Akmal, Clemis, Adish, Pram, and Brendan. Now, they are the ones who have been working so hard behind the scenes, so thank you to the team behind PE2023. Now, in today's episode, we have another expert joining us, none other than Eugene Tan, Associate Professor of Law at SMU. He's also a former nominated Member of Parliament and has been lending his valuable insights to the political scene in Singapore to various media since. Now, we actually also used a few clips of him in the trailers for the past few episodes, so you'll find him familiar. Now, give us a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us if you're on YouTube. And now, the last episode before we go to vote. Hi Eugene, welcome to Political Prude, the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
This is so interesting for me to be sitting opposite you, because I feel like over the many years of watching all these political happenings on the news, I've always been you were always on the panels, and for you to come here, I'm really honored and appreciative of you coming down.
It's also a privilege for me to be here.
Slay. Okay, so let's just go down right to it, right? So in a few hours, maybe a lot of us will be going down to the voting booths to actually place our votes. So a lot has happened since we also interviewed the candidates. We launched this series really before nomination day, and so much has happened. Personally, for you, how have you been feeling about everything that's been going down?
I think you're right to say that so much has happened. I think a lot of us expected a fairly dry sort of campaign, because you have candidates who are aspiring to be president, and so the expectation is that they would campaign in a manner that's in keeping with the dignity and the decorum of the office of the head of state. But of course, over the weekend, last weekend, things took off, with Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, coming out openly to endorse Mr. Tan Lian. And so that in a way has energized at one level, but it has also politicized, in my view, the presidential election. So I think it's in many respects, the campaign so far has engaged voters, right? Because I look at the three candidates before us, as providing voters with ample choices. It's really now a question of who each of us feels would be most suited to be our president.
Right.
So I think it's shaping up very nicely, and it's not over yet. So with the final day of campaigning, one can imagine that it's going to be a hard push, to the finish line.
Definitely. So each one of their campaigns have been rooted in terms of their slogan. So Mr. Tharman's is respect for all. Mr. Ng Kok Song's is united for our future. Mr. Tan Lian's is bring back trust, give us hope. Could you help us summarize what have they really been doing throughout their campaign, and how they've been communicating with their audiences in terms of their message?
I think at the start of the campaign, we couldn't tell in many respects, how the slogans would play out. But I think when you look at the campaign so far, all right, and we are in a way in the final phase, the slogans in a way have, in many respects, reflected the way that they've campaigned. So if you look at Mr. Tan Lian, I think his was perhaps the most political, right, in the sense that campaigning on a platform that we need to bring back trust. Voters need to have hope. And I'm not sure any one of us could have foreseen, that politicians will get involved in Dr. Tan's campaign, right? So he has obviously spoken about how he would be the people's voice, in terms of raising concerns that are top of the mind for many Singaporeans, right? Whether it's cost of living, housing, job security and all. And his approach obviously, has, I think, brought a lot of attention, as to what the president can and what the president cannot do, right? So there's a lot of potential in the office, but I would argue that there are also limits which are prescribed, in the Constitution. If we go on to Mr. Ng Kok Song, I think he has leverage on his position as being the only candidate with no political party affiliation, and so when he talks about uniting, I think that's a message that could very much resonate with a segment of voters. And when I say segment, I don't at all mean that it's a small group, right? But the idea that as someone with no affiliation to any political party, it puts him in a much better position, to play the role as a unifier. And of course, the presidency is expected to play that role. It is supposed to be above the political fray, and so people will be able to unite around this particular leader, without concerns about political affiliations, race, language, or religion. And then you have, Mr. Tharman, respect for all. I think that slogan, in many ways, point to how he seeks to be inclusive, if he were to be elected president. But more than that, I think it has also been reflected in the way that he has campaigned, right? He has consciously avoided commenting, on what his fellow candidates may have said about him, about the presidency. He has been very laser-like in his focus, focusing on his track record, the qualities, the character, the values, that he brings, to the presidency. So you see that range of different styles of campaigning, different sort of visions, some of them competing, some of them conflicting, visions of the presidency. So I think in many respects, this election has captivated Singaporeans, even though it is not a general election without the election rallies, without the door-to-door visits and all.
Yeah, I think it really has been a lightning in a bottle for the team here at Political Prude as well. We didn't expect the reception for this show to really just go so as huge as it went. It is number one on Spotify now, which is crazy for us. I think the entire team was screaming when we first found out.
Excellent.
And it's still number one, which is insane. But I want to talk to you about the campaign symbols now, because as much as I told everyone that the team has been preparing for this podcast for literally weeks on hand, we're just like doing our research, trying to see what kind of questions we should ask the candidates and whatnot. But myself and the team, it was a blind spot for us because I guess because we are first-time voters, we didn't really remember that there will be symbols attached to the candidates' names. It became kind of like a frustration point for me because I wish I asked them, like what were their thought processes behind the candidate symbols. But since the episodes have been released, of course by now the symbols have already been announced. So Mr. Tharman's one is the pineapple, which I think was generated a lot of chatter online. Mr. Tan Kin Lian's is four figures reaching out towards a flower, and Mr. Ng Kok Song's is a hand, a palm, with a heart shape in the middle of it. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that these symbols are an extension of their campaign slogans or their campaign key messages?
To some extent. I recall that when Mr. Tharman's symbol was unveiled, we were all wondering, why the pineapple? So it's very much a counterintuitive choice. But I think looking at how it generated discussion, getting people to go into his various social media platforms, websites, to find out, what does the pineapple mean? If you ask me, I think his symbol has, in a way, resonated, right? Because it's instantly recognizable, right? So he has gone on the campaign trail. He could bring along, a pineapple, right? He could give it away. But I think at another level, Mr. Tharman was certainly trying to connect with the ethnic Chinese community, in my view. Much as he said that, the pineapple is something that all the different races could easily identify with. But I think, it bears extra significance for the Chinese community, right? Whether, you are starting a business, entering your new home and all. And of course, online or, which you all will say what, and, so the idea of good fortune and prosperity. much as, symbols are less relevant today, simply because symbols are really from a bygone era, right? If you think about many years ago when people were not so, when literacy level was much lower, and people didn't really understand the Roman script, there was a need for voters to connect, symbols with a candidate or a political party in the case of a general election. But it's good that the practice has continued. I think it helps to be inclusive. But you can see the different approaches, right? So Mr. Ng and Mr. Tan, have sought to be more evocative, using, for Mr. Ng, for example, a hand and a heart, essentially trying to convey, his whole idea of uniting, how we are all together, we all operate, if one finger hurts, the palm hurts as a whole. And of course, Mr. Tan, trying to bring in, the different races, and of course, reaching out for, what appeared to be initially described as a mandala and later a flower, but his point about, that they're all trying to strive, for a better future. But of course, Mr. Tan's symbol changed. If you look closely before nomination day, it was the same 4 individuals, but they were reaching out to 5 stars and a crescent moon, and of course that's the national symbol in various aspects. And I suspect, that particular, the use of certain national symbols, would obviously not be permitted.
Right.
But regardless, I think in the end, the symbols seek to convey a larger message of what they represent, what they mean, what they stand for. But I would say that, Mr. Tharman's is probably the most effective, right? Instantly recognizable, whereas, a palm and a heart, I think, it is evocative, but, you need to go through the whole process of trying to understand what is it about, and that perhaps may take a bit more effort.
Absolutely. I thought that Mr. Tharman's symbol was instantly iconic. Even on social media, like so many people started sharing the icon of like the pineapple, right? I thought it was a brilliant move because suddenly it kind of showed a little cheeky side to him on social. Obviously, the pineapple means a lot to different people, but for a presidential candidate like Mr. Tharman, who's seen as kind of like serious, right? To have kind of a fun emoji, the pineapple is an emoji. It really made us feel like, okay, maybe he has a sense of humor, and then like many hours later, he went on Facebook to explain, the symbol, and I wish, okay, I understand why he did it because he is Mr. Tharman, right? But I felt like at first I did think that it was a 10 out of 10. But then after he explained it and gave it meaning, I was like 8 out of 10. No, because the without explaining it, it was such a boss move. It was, as we call it, big dick energy. You just let it be. But then, like after explaining it, I get it, and it became a little bit more like expected of him. So I don't know, but people did resonate with the symbol, and it did become this huge social media conversation, and it allowed people to see him, I think, in a different light, in a more casual way, and I think you're absolutely right. There are so many connotations to the icon of a pineapple. It is extremely familiar with the team behind Political Prude because we just moved into this studio 3 weeks ago, and then 2 days later we had to film Political Prude right here, and my team member Clemens was violently rolling a pineapple around the studio. So I think it worked. It was quite hot, right? Like a few weeks later we had all the other candidates here. So I see the connection to the Chinese community, and Mr. Tharman is an Indian candidate. I do think it helps him resonate a little bit more with the Chinese community, especially the older
He is
ones.
the only non-Chinese on the ballot sheet, so I think there is a need for him to say, I do recognize the importance of, this particular voting group.
Yeah, but that's why it's a 10 out of 10. Genius. So I want to move on to the CNA Forum, right? So everybody was tuned in to the CNA Forum yesterday. where we saw all three candidates sit down together for the first time because Mr. Tan did turn down a Straits Times interview. So it was interesting. I think so many people were posting it on, again, Instagram stories and sharing their opinions. My question is, what were some of the key takeaways if, let's say, someone didn't actually watch the CNA Forum?
I think the key takeaways would be, one, you should go and watch it. Minimally just to get a sense of who they are, how they express their views, what are some of the motivations, behind their run for the presidency, and how they might play the part of president. But I think there were also serious messages that they were trying to get across, and time doesn't allow us to go into the different messaging. But again, they played to what they would think would be their strongest point, right? So again, Mr. Ng, for example, reiterated, now it's becoming even clearer, right? So he says, I'm truly, the only candidate, who is non-partisan, no political party connection. But you could also see, from the forum, Mr. Ng trying to put across, the fact that he is equal to the task, of being president based on his long career in GIC. And of course, what really sort of captivated me was this point about duty. And I think it'd be good, if in future presidential elections, we have qualified people, who will have the courage to say, if I have something to contribute, that they would step forward. If we look at, Mr. Tan Lian, I mean, he not as eloquent as, the other two candidates, but he was very focused on emphasizing, that he would be the people's voice, raising issues, to the president, to the prime minister in many ways, trying to demonstrate that, you are not just going to get someone who is going to sit in Istana, but I'm going to be a champion for you. And of course, he went into areas which strictly are not within the president's powers or prerogatives. And of course, that earned him, a clarification from the host, Otelli Edwards, that this is not what the president can do. But some may take it that, that's good. We would want someone who could be another pressure point, if I can put it that way, vis-a-vis the government. In terms of, for me, Mr. Tharman had the most substantive answers, right? And I think it shouldn't surprise us, right? Because it reflects the breadth and depth of his experience, not just in Singapore government, right? But on having served in many international councils on a variety of issues, from human development, to finance, to economics, and the environment as well. So I think in the end, I'm not sure the forum is really going to change people's minds, particularly for voters who have decided. But I think where it would make a difference would be for undecided voters, right? Because this is the only occasion that you will see all three candidates in the same room, fielding the same questions, and looking at how they present themselves, how they seek to persuade people, right? So ultimately, right, the medium of TV can be decisive, because if you have nothing else to go by, right, it's a question of, which candidate resonated the most with me, right, in terms of how I responded to each of them. So I think it's useful. Some would have preferred a debate style, but I think, that could lead us into, arguments that may lead nowhere, right. In the forum.
Right. So social media has taken a huge role this presidential elections.
Oh, this is one example.
True, very true. They have interacted in various capacities with a lot of like social media creators, influencers, going on podcasts. My question for you is is this something new from the previous presidential election?
Well, I would say social media has been the key messenger, in this particular presidential election. I mean, there was social media, right? But in 2011, 12 years ago, it seems like a long time, and there have been many other platforms, and particularly podcasts. So you have long form, short form. You want people who just have only time to look at a photo, a picture. Instagram is there for you, right? You want a bit more. There's X. You want even more. There's Facebook. So that there is that variety. But what it all signals really is, given the very short campaign period, it is impossible for a presidential candidate to knock on 1 million doors, right? 1 million households. So social media gives them that opportunity, very often carefully created, putting a positive spin, putting them in the best light possible, to reach out to voters. So 24/7, voters can find out about, a particular candidate, what are his views. And of course, in this particular presidential election, what has been also quite clear is that the candidates sought to show the human side, right? So pets got into the part of the whole campaigning. You also have their spouses going on the campaign trail and also appearing on podcasts or videos or whatever. And I think in a way they were trying to convey that we're just like you. We do empathize, we do understand the sort of challenges that you might face. But I think social media cannot replace the in-person sort of campaigning, right? So in many ways for candidates, life has become a lot tougher for them on the campaign trail, right? Because you need to walk the real ground, but they also need to walk the virtual ground. And it's not just about, putting up posts or managing a website. It means coming out to do long form interviews, for podcasts, making TikTok videos. I mean, I don't think, we have seen the use of so many different forms of media in a very intensive way in a presidential election. So I would say that, social media is important, but I don't think, it allows for that sense of authenticity, that a candidate can put across, to a voter. I think that only comes about when the candidates interact on the ground, with the voters. I think social media, people might share, a post, a podcast that they find very interesting, but I'm not sure in the end, that unlike in-person campaigning, that if you sufficiently persuaded somebody, that person will in turn encourage others to say, well, you may want to look at this particular candidate, because when I interacted with him, this is what happened and all. So I think in terms of, having that knock-on effect, real knock-on effect, I think in-person campaigning would play a bigger part. But long and short of it is that social media campaigning is here to stay, and one can imagine, that it will play a bigger part in future elections. And social media, there's this, in a way, fixation with young people, but I think they also forget that, older people, young seniors like me, we too also do access social media.
So 2 things I want to say to that. So the first part is the value of in-person campaigning. So a lot of people have said that, they've listened to the Political Prude podcast and they feel like they really did connect with the candidates and they feel like they were part of the conversation a little bit, which is interesting. And of course, I acknowledge and recognize the privilege of having an hour with each one of these candidates, which is a lot of time to get to know them, right? However, you're right, absolutely right, in the sense that I actually got to attend 2 separate in-person sessions following the podcast, whereby I got to just observe Mr. Tharman as well as Mr. Ng in-person settings. Well, one was a dialogue session with young people, and another one was a tea session with entrepreneurs. So I was just listening to, I felt like I had my time with them, so I didn't want to hog the mic and ask more questions. So I was like, paiseh, right? So I just sat back and listened. But as I got to hear more from them, and I got to see them outside of a media setting, right? I felt like I actually understood them even more, or understood their personalities, the way they think even more. So I do think that there is value in person, right? So that's one. Oh, speaking of the digital space, Mr. Ng Kok Song made a very bold statement this election. I think it's unprecedented, right? Where he says, I'm not going to print anything. I'm not going to use posters. I'm going to go full digital. A lot of mixed responses online. Some people thought that, it's a missed opportunity. Some people said, hey, it's genius because it gives him visibility, because now headlines are going to say, oh, this Mr. Ng is doing this, and it gives him, again, presence in front of people's eyeballs, and that's everything. So what are your opinions on this?
One observation, that some people have made is that are there only two candidates in this presidential election, right? Because when they go on the streets, and they see it, on the lampposts and all, two posters only, right? And the flyers, again, right? They in some of the high footfall areas, people may get flyers from Mr. Tharman's team as well as Mr. Tan Lian's team. And so without that sort of physical publicity material, I think something is missing, right? I don't think we have completely gone digital, right? It is certainly possible that with each election, the use of banners, posters and all might become less and less common. But I think it's still something which voters like to be able to see. But more than that, it leaves an imprint on people's minds, that these are the candidates, right? So there is that visibility. We cannot assume that everybody goes on social media, right? And some people might just be more comfortable about, seeing who, who are on the posters and all. And if you're not there, then I'm not sure whether, that brand, that face, will resonate, with voters. But I'm sure Mr. thought about it very carefully. And with a very limited budget, right? And because there are campaign financing rules as well, I think he decided social media, would be that force multiplier that perhaps, would be more effective for him. Compared with Mr. Tharman and Mr. Tan, no one knew Mr. Ng Kok Song before the presidential election, right? So for him, as the least known candidate, I think he had to use other means. But I still do think that maybe he could have put some money aside for, the posters and all, but again, it's very hard to tell in the end, whether that would have any impact, but something just seems missing, you expect to see three gentlemen on our lampposts and all, but there are only two.
Right. Do you think it sets a precedent for other candidates to follow in the future?
Well, I think it gives food for thought, right, to future candidates, whether they want to, whether are they going to continue with traditional and social media advertising, or do they just keep to social media, right? But I think it's quite clear, right? In the end, the balance, each candidate, whether in a general or presidential election, have to decide what balance works for them. I think you need both modes of advertising, in my view, just to have that presence, that visibility, that profile.
Got it. So my second point is, when it comes to social media, I want to raise up the curtains a little bit on this and talk about behind the scenes, right? So the truth is this, is none of the candidates, maybe except Mr. Tan Lian, actually run their own social media pages. It's quite obvious to me that they have a team behind them, perhaps the difference lies in the degree in which they approve the posts or captions, or maybe some of them write the captions or whatnot. But it's very clear that they have social media teams now. So for me, it's like, it changes the game entirely, because now you have to choose the right people who understand the different platforms under the social media sphere to then communicate your messages correctly. And it's not just like, I have one social media manager and they can like be good at everything. It's not, because to communicate on TikTok, to communicate on Instagram, and within Instagram stories, Instagram reels, Instagram posts, it's all very different, right? And how to communicate on Facebook, how to communicate on WhatsApp, it's entirely different. And I will share this with the listeners here, is that I actually got to witness firsthand a lot of their social media teams. And I could identify who were the sharp ones, because they were asking specific types of questions. They were preparing certain types of content for their social media pages. And what I learned from that experience was that your social media campaign is as strong as the team that you choose. So I think this will really impact future elections, whether it's presidential or general elections. And I do see more importance being placed on curating this team on social media. Yeah.
Well, I think definitely, right? I think in the end, we are looking at how can we multiply that message, and not just sending out more social media posts or whatever, but how do candidates ensure, that the message resonates, that they will keep coming back for more, that it also has that persuasive effect. But I think one thing about social media is that, compared with in-person campaigning, is, this whole thing of authenticity, right? I think social media can come close, right? But there's nothing like a firm handshake,
okay.
A pat on the back of a voter, or sharing a joke in person and all. I think that's something which can still play a very big part, right? Because you are in the glare of everyone around. People observe the candidates. People see how they relate, how they react, and I think that's something which will still continue to to build that sort of bond, between the candidate and the voters.
Absolutely. Your vote counts, but you know what else counts? A follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, a 5-star rating, a subscribe on YouTube, and a thumbs up. You count. You matter. I love you. Now back to the episode. Okay, so speaking of unprecedented, Mr. Tan Lian also, I think, did something that's unexpected. So he actually turned down an interview with the Straits Times, where they wanted to do a video feature on all three candidates at the same time. I think a lot of the people in the media industry were a little bit like taken aback by that, because obviously as a candidate you want to be as visible as possible. His reason, I believe, was that he felt like Straits Times was running a smear campaign against him. What do you think of this move? Like, do you think that this was a good move on his end?
I don't think it was a good move, right? Because when I look at the profiles that were done, I think it started with Mr. George Goh, right? And then you had followed by Mr. Tharman and Mr. Ng Kok Song, maybe not in that order. But I found the write-ups and the videos done by the Straits Times team, to be positive, right? It sort of focused on the quality, the positive qualities, the good points, that each candidate wanted to put out, to readers, of the Straits Times. So I thought it was a missed opportunity, right? I mean, but of course, for Mr. Tan, I suppose, that was him again making a point, that perhaps you shouldn't trust mainstream media, right? Whatever you read there, about me, which is negative, is all wrong, inaccurate, right? So because he has persisted in this narrative, that whatever controversy that he's mired in, whether it's over the pretty girls posts or whatnot, it all is all a smear campaign, either by mainstream media or by the other presidential candidates. So I think it is a missed opportunity, right? Because I would say that, the media in general, whether you are mainstream or social media, that if you want to be taken seriously, you need to present a balanced, reporting, of the presidential candidates. I thought that was what happened, with the Straits Times series. So I thought it's a missed opportunity, right? To have that additional reach, because you want to, reach out also, to people who are Straits Times voters, and they are all along the political spectrum. So for me, I think it was a missed opportunity.
Right. So independence has been the buzzword of this election. It has really dominated the conversation surrounding the presidential election of this year. All three of them have really tried to establish their independence in their own way. Why do you think this has emerged as a key issue this election?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. It wasn't really a big issue, if I recall correctly, in the 2011 presidential election, right, which was the last contested election. But I think this time round, it's perhaps a confluence of developments, right? So you have, Mr. Tharman, a very well-regarded former PAP minister, in politics for more than 20 years, under the ruling People's Action Party, coming out and then, when he announced his candidacy, right, then I think that put pressure on the other hopefuls. How are they going to present themselves as being quite different from Mr. Tharman, right? And I suppose, there was also a recognition that if we are looking at a president who is going to exercise custodial powers, how do you ensure, that the person will go about his duties without fear or favor? So I think it was this confluence, right, of the other candidates wanting to differentiate themselves from Mr. Tharman, and also trying to, in a way, unpick what they would regard as Mr. Tharman's weak point, that he may not be able to do his duties without fear or favor. But I also take the view that I think independence, perhaps we may have fixated so much, right? Because I think we can all certainly agree, that past labels or past affiliations are probably need not be determinative, right? And I think it boils down eventually, right, to the character. And by character, I mean, whether the president has the backbone, right, to stand up against the government of the day when there is a need, for him to do so. So, but the way independence has been played out so far in the presidential election, it is seen as though, well, with independence, I can do this vis-a-vis the government. I can raise your concerns. I can try to, reduce NS or whatever. But independence is not as a means to being an alternative center of power, because ours still remains a parliamentary system of government. So I think going forward, right, we will certainly see independence featuring in future presidential elections. But I certainly take the view that independence is important, right? But we must be careful how we go about trying to determine, whether someone is going to be independent or not. Because, for example, right, you can have a candidate who comes without any political affiliation. But if the president then goes about trying to pursue his or her own agenda or seeks to promote his or her family interests, then that president is not independent, right? Because he or she is beholden to a certain agenda and all. And so, I think in that sense, Mr. Tan, claiming to be truly independent, I think in many ways, it has undercut, or rather, the claim to be truly independent has been severely undercut, with opposition politicians, active opposition politicians, campaigning, endorsing him and all. So I'm a bit concerned about, the elections, if we were to boil down about, to this question of independence. particularly when independence is seen as whether you have past affiliations to the ruling party in particular. I think we need to go for a more expansive understanding, a more nuanced understanding of what it means, to be independent, to be able to exercise the president's custodial powers independently.
Got it. Could you maybe very quickly recap what are each of the arguments for being, quote unquote, independent?
Oh, yeah. I think when we look at Mr. Tharman, right, he cannot run away from the fact that, he was a PAP member, for more than 20 years. And so, he has sought to pitch his independence, by urging voters to look at his track record, pointing out to his student activist days, pointing out to how even within government, he has sought to push the envelope, in terms of policies that he had a hand in. For example, when he was finance minister, I think one could trace, that push towards the PAP government moving to left of center, right? So for him, it's look at my track record, look at the fact that I have been independent minded, even though I've been part of the government. So he goes by the, he says, I'm an open book. You can see, what you see is what you get. And I thought he had this fairly memorable phrases. For Mr. Tan Lian, right? He's saying, well, look, I don't have any political affiliation, right? Although he forgets that he was a member of the ruling party, and he was the CEO of a cooperative, that was part of the NTUC umbrella, right? And the National Trades Union Congress has a symbiotic relationship, with the PAP. But he is trying to, in a way, put himself as the political opposite of Mr. Tharman, right? I'm not a PAP member. I have no political affiliation, so past a political affiliation, so I'm independent. And this is where, Mr. Ng Kok Song found that niche position, right? Where he says, look, compared to the two men, I have no political affiliation at all, ever, right? But yes, he rightfully acknowledges that he was part of the establishment, right, by virtue of his career in the public service and then in GIC. But I think he also tried to leverage on that, to say that, look, these experiences give me the ability, to be a custodian of our national reserves. So I think in the end, I don't think the elections will boil down on independence, because I think ultimately, there are things going for and against, each candidate's claim, to be independent. I suspect the typical voter will look at the whole package. And I think it'd be too, in my view, my personal view, it would be too narrow to just focus on this question of independence based on past affiliations.
Thanks for sharing. So over the weekend, I think something massive, at least in my opinion, it was massive, took place. So for those of you who might not be aware, former presidential election candidate Dr. Tan Cheng Bock actually endorsed Mr. Tan Lian this weekend. And he is, of course, the chairman of the opposition Progress Singapore Party, which is PSP. And he said that he was endorsing Mr. Tan in his personal capacity. This means that Dr. Tan and also Mr. Tan Ji are now on the side of Mr. Tan Lian. And it's obviously quite interesting to see, because we see they were all three former candidates of the 2011 presidential elections, which we refer to as the Battle of the Tans. And I see a lot of memes, when the three of them started shaking hands, and people calling it the TriTan. So I thought it was pretty funny to consume on social media, but also I thought it was a very bold move. And also, like, I posted on my Instagram stories, I was like, hey guys, I think this is huge, because we've never seen anything like this before. So Mr. Ng Kok Song then came forward to say that he thinks that this move of all the opposition party candidates coming together, ganging up, quote unquote, was a very unhealthy and a worrisome development. And he says that they are dragging the presidential elections into gutter politics. He gave very sharp words. He said, I think it's quite shameful. And he says that, it's a dishonor to the presidency. So what do you think about everything that went down?
I think Mr. Ng Kok Song's reaction is understandable, because he stands to lose the most with Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, a well-regarded opposition figure, openly endorsing Mr. Tan Kin Lian. Because when you look at Mr. Ng, right, who has sought to put himself as, someone who has no past political affiliation, one would say that, they might put him in the same camp as Mr. Tan Kin Lian, right? That means not from the PAP, in other words, to put it more somewhat simplistically. And so with Dr. Tan endorsing Mr. Tan Kin Lian, Mr. Ng is rightfully concerned, that people who are going to support a candidate with no PAP affiliation will likely or could then now lean more towards Mr. Tan, right? And even if, let's say, people were to put Mr. Ng, as being part of the establishment, that means in the same camp as Mr. Tharman, he also stands to lose, right? Because people who are keen to, all things being equal, to support someone from the establishment will say, hey, maybe we shouldn't split our votes, so let's determine between Mr. Tharman and Mr. Ng who is the stronger candidate, and put our votes behind that one candidate rather than splitting between the two. So he stands to lose the most. But I think beyond this strategic calculation of whether someone stands to gain or lose, I think Mr. Ng made a valid point, right? Because it has now become politicized. Politicized in the sense that, look, Dr. Tan, Mr. Tan Cheng Bock, Mr. Tan Jee Se, and all the other opposition figures that are on Mr. Tan's team, right, are now, they are effectively saying, be that figure, be the president, who will oppose, the government of the day. I think that's not what the presidential election is all about. That is certainly not what the president's office is all about, right? And of course, when you bring in politicians backing one candidate over the others, it raises questions about the independence of that particular candidate who's been endorsed by a particular group of politicians, right? Because if he wins, does it mean that the president is going to be beholden, to this particular group of politicians, who have helped him win, the presidential contest? And it raises serious questions about whether that president can be a unifying figure, right? Because he would have clearly stamped himself, as a opposition type president, who will oppose, the government of the day. And I think that totally turns the presidency, on its head. And I don't think that is what, it should be. And to me, it makes no difference, for Dr. Tan to say that he is endorsing him in a personal capacity, right? Because he is synonymous, with the opposition. He is the leader of, perhaps, the leader of, one of two opposition parties who have seats in parliament. So in the same way, right, if the prime minister were to endorse, Mr. Tharman, let's say, for example, no one's going to buy it if the prime minister says that, I'm endorsing, this candidate, Mr. Tharman, in my personal capacity. So I think, one could look at it as a shot in the arm for Mr. Tan's campaign, which has been mired in controversy, right? But on the other hand, I think it would do a disservice, to the office of the president.
Mm. So just to play devil's advocate, right? Because Mr. Tharman was from the PAP just not too long ago, Do you think that the politicization of this election was almost inevitable? Some may even say that it was politicized from the start just because he was from the PAP.
I think we should try to recognize that in our system, right, we shouldn't be surprised if we have in the past as well as in the future, right, that we have presidential candidates, who would be from the ruling party, who would be from the public service, who would be from the establishment, right? Temasek, GIC, or one of the fifth schedule entities, in the constitution, JTC, HDB, and all. And I think if we are to say that these people will not be independent or should not run, or that they will never be exercise their powers without fear or favor, I think we would then be excluding, right, a group of men and women who would otherwise be really good for Singapore, as our head of state. So what the Constitution provides, is that a candidate must have resigned from any political party affiliation. And I think that's a minimum safeguard, right? So he or she has drawn the line and say, I'm no longer, a member of a political party. Ultimately, whether voters are going to buy, into the narrative that this person with a past political affiliation, will be able to do the job without fear or favor. I think it boils down to the character. It boils down to whether that person has got the moral backbone, and whether that person recognizes, that his office has sufficient constitutional safeguards to be able to enable him, to act independently. Now, I suppose in a one-party dominant system, you have a former PAP person against a non-PAP person, right? But in future, right, the government of the day could be constituted by another political party. So are we going to say that, past members of that political party should not be eligible or will never be seen to be independent? Right. So again, I think I would say I agree with Mr. Tharman, that we should avoid simplistic labels, right? Because we all have past affiliations, but does it mean that we are not able to rise above them? I think we often forget that when you're put in a role where you have to have the trust and confidence of Singaporeans, where the office is sufficiently ring-fenced in terms of safeguards, to enable you to act independently, and the fact that you will also take an oath of office, and what you do, is in the public glare, that we shouldn't have any real concern, that someone is not going to act independently, or rather, to be more precise, to exclude somebody, right, because he or she, would have past affiliations with the government of the day. Today is the PAP, tomorrow it could be another party, so do we then exclude all of these people? I think, we have to be careful. Otherwise, there's always a concern that there are not enough candidates, so are we then really going to say that, we ought to exclude more people such that it becomes even harder, to find suitable people, to want to run to be president?
Now, on the ground, when Mr. Tharman first came forward to say that he was interested to run for president, a lot of the sentiments was that he's a sure win, right? Or he, at least a strong contender. Do you still think that he's a clear frontrunner at this point of the election?
I would still say that he is, the front runner. I think someone looking at the presidential forum yesterday on CNA, right, would be able to, to see in terms of the quality of the answers, in terms of how he engaged, the way someone sees the world and all. I think objectively one could say that, Mr. Tharman, was clearly performed the best. Now, of course, people are not going to vote on the basis of one forum. But I think and that's why Mr. Tharman has emphasized a lot on his track record, right? Because he knows that his track record, in a way, would be hard to be matched by the other candidates. But I think it's not just his track record, right? But I think he has built up a reputation over his more than 20 years in politics, as an independent-minded, person. That the association with the ruling party was very much about trying to change from within, right? That if you want to see a better Singapore, you would disagree with policies that perhaps, opposition could be one vehicle, but the other one could be, the ruling party, right? So you try to change from within. And he reminded us about his student activist days, and about how, his views on the Marxist conspiracy, in the late 80s and all. So I would think that, when you're right to say that when he first said that he was going to run for president, I think that got many people excited, right? Because he is, at least going by a survey a couple of years ago, right, the most popular PAP politician, right? Someone has said, that, or I have said that, he's a prime minister that Singapore would never have. So I think he's still the front runner, right? But but of course, with Dr. Tan weighing in, for Mr. Tan Kin Lian, and the possibility, that people who might prefer someone from the establishment, all things being equal, the possibility that votes might split, then there's a possibility that, the contest has become a lot more keen than it was, in June when Mr. Tharman indicated that he was going to run. So it's interesting, right? Because I think Mr. Tharman would rather be the underdog. I think his biggest concern now is that if enough voters think that, it is a shoo-in for him, right, and decide to put their vote for someone else, just to put a bit of pressure on the government, right, which is how some people say we should use our votes, then there is, in my view, a very real possibility, that in a very close race, he may not cross the line first. So I think based on their CVs, based on how they've performed on a campaign trail, based on their track records, I would say Mr. Tharman is still the candidate to beat. But I don't think it is a foregone conclusion. And we still have, 2-3 days left to go, in the campaign, and anything, can happen, right? So, and that is why every vote counts.
Absolutely. In the sister episode to this episode, we had some friends come over, and there was one part of the conversation where I said that it was, in my opinion, it's very interesting to see the narrative about Mr. Ng Kok Song shift. When he first came in, a lot of people thought that he would be splitting the votes between him and Mr. George Goh, and both of them will be running against Mr. Tharman. At this point, I would actually argue that Mr. Ng would be splitting the votes from Mr. Tharman, actually, because Mr. Tan has really positioned himself away from the two of them. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I think that's a fairly good observation. I mentioned earlier about how, Mr. Ng is caught in that very difficult bind, right? How should he portray himself? And even if he seeks to portray himself one way, voters may not go along with that particular narrative that he had painted of himself. And so it is possible that, if Mr. Ng is seen as, I think Mr. Ng now, given the opposition politicians' endorsement of Mr. Tan Kin Lian, that he's certainly now, his orbit is certainly closer to Mr. Tharman's, right? And so that is where, you could have the possibility of vote splitting if, let's say, voters cannot differentiate much between, or there's nothing much to differentiate between Mr. Tharman and Mr. Ng. But if voters feel that one of them is clearly ahead of the other, right, then you may have what is called vote pooling, right? Voters deciding that, okay, we better not split our votes. We should then go for who we think is the stronger candidate within people within the same orbit. And that's where, you may have that possibility. So Mr. Ng's strategy will now have to really focus very much on let's forget the two political extremes. I'm the person, who will not have the baggage of politics and all, and I'm the one, that can do the job without fear or favor, right? I can be that truly independent president. Now, whether that narrative will persuade voters, I think it's something which Mr. Ng will have to press very hard in what remains of the campaign. But yes, I think the endorsement by Dr. Tan has changed the equation somewhat, but I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Tan's endorsement in the end doesn't count for much. It will certainly help Mr. Tan, not to lose his election deposit again. But the general thinking, that because Dr. Tan Cheng Bok, Mr. Tan Ji Se, and Mr. Tan Kin Lian, collectively had about 64% of the popular vote in the 2011 general election, that people who voted for either Dr. Tan Cheng Bok or Mr. Tan Ji Se will now vote for Mr. Tan. I don't think things work so in such simplistic ways, because there are a whole variety of considerations. Right? Dr. Tan was very much seen as being part of the establishment camp, and many regarded that there was nothing that differentiated him from Dr. Tony Tan. That's why you had a splitting of the votes. Right? So one could argue that if we look at the establishment, in the 2011 presidential election, collectively they got about 70% of the votes, of the popular vote. If you put both Dr. Tony Tan and Mr. Tan Cheng Bok, in the establishment camp, because in 2011 we mustn't forget, Dr. Tan wasn't yet an opposition figure. Right? Yes, he broke away from the ruling party. He felt that he can bring a different quality to the presidency, and so people saw him pretty much as part of the establishment. So I think it remains to be seen, right? But I think it goes back to the point, that every vote matters, right? If you think about the 2011 presidential election where Dr. Tony Tan won by less than 8,000 votes, every vote will count, right? And so this attempt by some individuals to encourage voters to spoil their ballots, I'm not sure that would be a wise thing to do, right? Because I think in the end, you need to use your vote, right? Your one precious vote, to decide who among the three, will be best for Singapore and the presidency. And I think to spoil it would be, a wasted opportunity to have a say. I think spoiling a vote is as good as not having a say.
Nicely said. So I was at a birthday party over this weekend, and this was after the Political Prude episodes came out. And when I reached the party, everybody was like, "Tell me who to vote for," and I'm like, "Guys, no, please." But I think a lot of people out there still haven't actually decided where their vote is going to go. My final question to wrap up this episode is really, before we go to the polls, what are some of the key considerations that first-time voters should have in placing their vote?
Well, I think it makes no difference whether you're a first-time voter or whether you've voted, whether you're voting, let's say, for the third time, in a presidential election. For me, this will be the third time I'll be voting, and I would say that I was just as excited, when I voted in 1993, in the first ever presidential election. I think ultimately it really goes down to, each voter will have their own set of criteria, right? And I respect, their set of criteria, the sort of different weights that they may put to different indicators. But I think among the indicators, right, how much weight they put on it, how high a priority it is really up to each individual. But I think they need to consider, whether someone who is best suited to do the job, right? And for that, voters need to know, that the president doesn't just only exercise custodial powers. The president also has ceremonial roles, as well as a community role. And we mustn't forget that, the president is also Singapore's chief diplomat, right? Who represents Singapore, on the international stage. So one, of course, the experience, the ability, the track record. I suppose, it is also important, for voters, to appreciate, who among the candidates, would be able to exert, a soft influence on the government of the day, right? Which candidate would best be able to work with the government of the day? This is important because we still remain a parliamentary system of government, right? The Prime Minister has control and directs, government policies and laws. So lawmaking. So it becomes crucial, right? Because if we have a situation where the President and the Prime Minister are constantly at loggerheads, then I think our governance would become somewhat problematic. So it's important to be able to consider, right, which candidate would command, right, the trust and confidence of the government as well. And of course, ultimately, right, the important consideration of, which candidate, based on experience, ability, and track record, would be able to exercise the powers of the custodial powers, in an independent manner, without fear or favor. So all this requires, to my mind, particularly for first-time voters and even for third-time voters, like me, I think it becomes crucial for us to know what the president can do and cannot do under the Constitution. Right? The president is not supposed to be a separate power center. The president doesn't initiate policies, doesn't make laws. So voters must vote for a candidate, who has a clear-eyed view, of what the presidency is all about. In other words, they must vote for a candidate, who has a conception of office that actually does exist. Right? Because if you vote for a candidate who promises things, but the president is not able to execute any of those, right? Then after 6 years, you will see that nothing can be done. So in other words, right, the short point is that we need to vote for a candidate, who is seeking for an office that actually does exist under our Constitution, right? And I think again, I would say, that one vote from each one of us matters immensely.
What a beautiful way to end the episode. Thank you so much, Eugene. That's all the time we have. Definitely a lot to think about before we all go make that decision in the polling booth. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I really appreciate this. It's been an honor to speak to you. I've been watching you on TV for a long, long time now, but it's so cool that I'm speaking to you in person.
It's a privilege to be on Political Prude, and I wish you guys all the very best in trying to get Singaporeans, to be better informed about politics and governance in Singapore. I think that's an important job.
Big slay. Thanks.
Thank you.
And there you have it, guys. The last episode of Political Prude, the podcast before polling day. Now, big ups to Professor Eugene Tan for gracing PPTP. I'm actually quite sad, guys. I don't want to say goodbye, but really thank you so much for sticking around with us. This show was really just proudly brought to you by Zodapop by Zerap Media. Again, we are a new podcast community and network. So if you're an organization looking for a media house to help you launch a podcast, reach out to say hello. If you're a creator looking for a community to start this journey with, say hello. Now, if you want to check out some of the other shows we produce and also other creator-led shows within the community, just search Zodapop by Zerap Media on the various platforms and they should show up. Now, give us a follow and a 5-star rating on Spotify if you have loved this series. And don't forget to subscribe to us and give this video a thumbs up if you're on YouTube. Until next time, guys, it's Joel signing off. This was the Zodapop podcast.